spoke a little bit about the myths of leadership. And so maybe if you could deepen that, one being that the leader has to be this authoritative, know-it-all figure. But is there others that you have encountered?
There are a few. I think the one being in control is a big one. I think often leaders think to be a good leader, you have to put your outcome first. So an overvaluing of the outcome over the process and the relationship, that somehow the result matters more than how we got there and what it cost the people to deliver it. And I've seen that often. And of course, people will, in a time of crisis, go overboard and they will deliver. But you can't, and often leaders don't recognize that they can't operate always at that level. And I used to work at the beginning of my consulting career for a small boutique consultancy, management consultancy. And their motto was, where results count and people matter. Because fundamentally, we can't separate both. And we all know that people perform better in situations they feel accepted. So that's another one. I think the other one actually that comes often, and I really want to say as we speak of leadership, that we're not talking just about those people at the top of company. You don't need to be at the top to be a good leader.
That's a really important one, yes.
Isn't it? Isn't it? So whatever your position, you can be leading a meeting, a conversation, even if you're just a junior on the floor that's just come up, okay? You will always have a way of stepping up, of being present, and that is leadership.
Welcome to another Being and Leading podcast, where I'm talking to interesting individuals who are there to build real connections and create success that actually matters and feels right rather than just looks right. And today, I'm really delighted to be speaking with Marie-Anne Chidiac, who is a Gestalt psychotherapist and are an organizational therapist as well. You can correct me if there are other titles, but I think in addition to those surface level accolades, I was also very curious about your journey of creating change, of leadership, and of making impact. So I'm really curious, where are we going to get and where all these questions are going to lead us. So really welcome, Marie-Anne. And yeah, as I said, the first question I always ask is, what are some words that you identify yourself with?
Thank you for your welcome, Alex, and it's lovely to speak to you, and thank you for your invitation. I like the fact that, yes, we start with the surface level labels and then we see where the conversation takes us. So,
and in addition to that, the being, so the whole podcast started with being and doing.
Yes.
And the reason that that's there is that the being comes before the doing.
Yes.
Is the source of the doing. So,
yes.
So my idea is always to show the human first and then the profession later.
Yes, I see that. And so it's being and leading, I guess, now.
Exactly.
So we'll hopefully
Yes.
be talking more about leadership.
Yeah.
So I think you asked me 3 words, is it? Or yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
3 words that identify me. And I think the most obvious one to start with is that I'm very curious and almost a persistent learner. And I have a feeling, Alex, it's something that we perhaps share. Yes, you were recognizing that, given a bit of the sketch of your journey that you gave me. And I guess where I would go is that one memory that stands out to me that kind of reflects the fact that it probably was with me very young is that I dismantled clocks when I was young. You know, these old-fashioned clocks that were still mechanically driven. I never could put them back together, unfortunately, which is quite a challenge. But I think learning nourishes me, and I'm continuously curious. So when I'm curious, I'm at my best. So that's one. The other part, I guess, is something around care, compassion. I'm a mother. I've got 3 teenagers at the moment, so that's very figural for me. And it's also care and compassion somehow is fundamental to my belief that actually at some level we all do our best. And compassion for people and situation is just such a helpful stance in life. What would be my third? I think loyalty, probably. That says probably loads about me, but loyalty certainly in myself. But also I value it in others, and it links for me somehow fundamentally in terms of being part of a community where people have each other's backs, and where you can also challenge each other, but also with compassion, hopefully. So that's my 3, at least at this moment in the morning.
Yeah, I really, interestingly, I deeply resonate with loyalty as well. And I really feel that there is something inside me that shivers when it's not there, where it feels broken when it's not there. So it is a really important aspect, I think. Yeah.
Yes, I think I have a sense that perhaps we both know maybe more the consequences of what disloyalty could mean.
And look like.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, and
Exactly. And I would just also comment on the clock breaking apart and trying to put them together. There is something that gave me joy as you were speaking about that, and it's in the way our Gestalt founders talked about aggression, healthy aggression. I was like, oh, this is such a beautiful example of
yes.
uninterrupted movement on trying to take something apart and then put it together.
Yes.
And I'm just curious about the support in the field for you to do that, and how is that maybe reverberating somewhere currently in your work continues? How is like in
Yes.
your later life?
Yes. I think in my household, and probably that dates me actually. We had when I was growing up, we had very unusually, of course, I didn't grow up in the UK, but in the Lebanon, and even there we had a whole set of Encyclopedia Britannica, which you can imagine is a huge amount. And my greatest frustration was that it only went up to 1968 or something like that. So I couldn't have anything after that. But I think learning was encouraged. Learning in my culture of birth was, something very important. And I think even now I thrive on surrounding myself with people that have that same type of appetite. So I even tell my supervisees that I could get caught up easily in some sort of theoretical discussion. So let's sort of manage this. And I think it's really a wonderful way of connecting as well with people.
Yeah. And I as I'm having another smile because
Good. We're doing well.
I'm recognizing the mechanism. Yeah, yeah, and and growing up in Lebanon also caught my curiosity because I know also what's going on there right now, and also the topic we are talking about, being in leading. I will just read a small paragraph from your one of your articles on the relational change page, which maybe connects to leadership. And it's you've said, as we navigate this fragile moment in history, let us continue to be steadfast in our commitment to the relational, quietly, slowly, but undeniably. And I'm curious what leadership means to you, given the historical moment we are in. And how do you believe that what you are doing, and what Gestalt or any other organizational method is trying to do is helpful in this particular moment.
It's a big question. And as you were reading just even that sentence, I really could feel the emotions, because I wrote that blog having had the privilege, maybe, I don't know if it's a pleasure, but to watch J.D. Vance give his speech almost live. I was, just watching it. I just happened to be on TV. And I wrote that as a reaction, almost. It was a bit of a visceral response, I think, to something that I felt was both familiar and shocking at a number of levels. Primarily, it felt that somehow as a society and in global politics and our understanding of what good leadership is about, we were taking somehow a step back in time, back to some sort of Victorian era, where influence would only come through hierarchy or coercion, because his stance was very much a strongman stance, about influencing, that his view was superior to anyone in the room. There was no attempt to listen or understand other people's point of view. And that use of power was so openly coercive, that it floored me. I couldn't believe that here I was in a Western world, and this was happening in a political context where leaders, although, far from perfect, no leader is perfect, but somehow I still held that sense coming from where I came from, that they had a sense of values and respected at least rules of conduct. So that was, very strong reaction. And I think, that followed as well what happened in the Oval Office, that sort of bullying behavior with Trump. And I think, like many of us, actually, I felt powerless. But at the moment, the more I stayed with it, I thought that we could either have that reaction that many will have, that's, let's fight in the same way and just keep going. But in doing that, we lose something. We lose something really valuable. And that felt important to keep alive, these values. And for me, these values are encapsulated to a commitment to being relational, because it stands for being ethical in how I show up, ethical in how I relate to others, and how I sense and take account of people's situation and the context that they are in. So, it felt like a real emotional kind of outpouring, and somehow it really made meaning out of why I was doing what I was doing at the moment. That somehow more than ever now, we needed to keep to these values that actually attracted me when I moved from Lebanon to Europe.
Yeah. No, and that's a very relatable sentence. It's somehow, I do remember almost like chasing freedom. And suddenly being here and feeling it slips away, maybe in some way. It did feel slightly devastating, and it took some time to readjust my system, to find my personal space of action. And I imagine this text was somewhat yours.
Yes, yeah, I think very much so. And I reflected, I become curious when you speak, Alex, how old you were when, the troubles happened back in Serbia and you left, because, that feels, really fundamental as well in terms of what we're doing. How established were you? Were you prepared to build a life outside? All those sorts of things. I imagine you were quite young, actually.
Yeah. So I was 9. I was 9 when the bombings. So I was born when the country fell apart, and then I was 9 when the bombings came. But I think, for me, I think the feeling of not being able to leave the country was the most pervasive fear of being someone, as you mentioned, very curious, very interested in the world, kind of having not having that freedom to then get to know the world, being again young as well, felt really, I felt like I really was digging to get some sort of freedom. And then and I think that did really really left a mark in a sense of exactly what you've said. What am I doing in what I consider valuable and important?
Yes.
Yeah.
It gives you a really strong sense of purpose. I mean, I came in my early 20s, so the war in Lebanon started when I was 7 or 8. Actually, I came in my early 20s, and it was as you say, liberating. I really echo with that, because you think, oh my God, I'm in a country that primarily, and I don't know if I would speak, if it's true for you, but all these countries in wars, there's a lot of corrupt leadership.
Yes.
You can't be at war without corrupt leadership. That's what a war situation invites.
Yeah.
And so coming to a country and what the West and the liberal values stand for, and and I don't mean like liberal party, but the ideals of liberalism felt really important. That there was a belief that there's a democratic system, that there were politicians that will serve the people rather than be self-serving. And I think all of that was so hopeful. And, I'm wondering where we're going from now. Yeah, and in which direction. I mean, we're speaking at a time where the tariff war has really started in earnest this morning. So let's watch that space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then I guess it's not only that the war brings corruption, but for me, being post-war in the country, seeing it's almost like, the nature's image of vultures coming at a corpse. It is a very this is how it felt living in a post-war country, especially a small one. And I feel this is seeing that erosion in front of one's eyes. And I think that has also impacted my parents, them having strong values and wanting to do things properly and right, and seeing how they were just seeing that falling apart in front of them, has been a very kind of disorienting experience, I would say.
Yes, absolutely. And I really understand what it is. And I think, somehow I feel privileged to have had the benefit of the experience. I imagine you too, because it makes us a bit more resilient, we hope, and I really feel we need people that still believe in what is right, despite everything.
Yes. Yeah. And there's an interesting thing about, I think, those cycles where you really need people who remember how bad it is, so that they will be kind of the change makers, because the generations that haven't gone through that, they maybe don't realize where are we possibly heading, whereas for us who have that vivid memory of where it can go, and I guess
so true.
I guess the question there is how do we, and I think that's a question again of leadership, of how do we not allow the past to shape the future for us as well? Because I'm noticing my fear creeping in from time to time, having to be very conscious about knowing this might not be the same moment in time. So that like I don't really make the mistakes of from the fear of, oh, this is where we are going. So I'm wondering how is that working for you right now, and what are you supporting yourself with in that fearful place?
I think Gestalt, when it says Gestalt, sense of awareness and being in the now, is probably the biggest reminder that we can either choose to respond to the now, and while still holding that we have this background and this history. So it is not the same. It does not feel the same. I am I'm much different in time, in terms of my age. So I don't feel that difference. But in terms of leadership, I couldn't agree more than what you said, around people that have lived through wars of any kind don't choose war again. And it's so important to keep a sense of that, and I think there have been enough wars around the globe to kind of remember that, remember the impact of that. So I don't have a solution of what leaders need to stay aware of, but I think staying present to yourself, staying aware of what you're doing to others, what you're living yourself, and how you're impacted by your past or your fears primarily, that would probably be my best recommendation for most leaders, at least in the political.
And I'm also wondering from your actual work, I mean, I know what always gives me hope is seeing people change in the therapy room and knowing that there can be something extremely difficult that feels and looks almost impenetrable or impossible to transmute and alchemize, and then it does happen. And I don't have a sense of that happening in organizations, but I know how it looks like when it does happen. Just wondering, is there some hope that you draw from successful cases of change in your own work, where you've seen organizations that maybe have been organized as the world is like today, but then with the right interventions, things have actually progressed and changed and transformed in more supportive and healthy environments?
I think I always keep hope, and I always am hopeful. And the reality is that we keep hope that individuals can change and also systems change. So sometimes, in order for systems to turn to a more healthy way of being, then I think either some individuals should leave or new individuals come in. But I think keeping hope for organizations and how they have changed, certainly I've seen and been alongside organizations that have managed that. And I think Gestalt is very powerful in and very suitable for that sort of work. When I think of, the two main issues that usually organizations face, and that leaders find most unsettling. The first one would be toxic relationships or difficult dynamics, because irrespective of how good a strategy is or a plan, if the dynamics aren't good between the people, then that becomes a problem. And the second part that Gestalt also helps is, and that is a big issue for organizations, is the issue of uncertainty. You can't plan for it, as a definition. And how to manage that is often not addressed, or leaders aren't prepared to cope with that. Business schools don't teach you that. And I've done my MBA to business schools, etc. They don't teach you that, not enough. And Gestalt deals really well with that for several reasons. In some ways, it's a very process-focused approach. So what we do in organizations, as organization practitioners, is that we stay really close to what's happening for them in the moment through our phenomenological approach. So for the people, your listeners who don't know, phenomenology is really primarily a way of inquiring into the lived experience, if you like, of a group, a person, or a department, what's going on in the moment, and staying with that experience in order to see how best it unfolds. And this is where the magic happens, not too dissimilar to really therapy. I guess what needs to happen in an organization is that you prepare, you have enough support, enough containment, I would say, for that to happen. But let's say you come to, I mean, I've often find that I've come to facilitate, let's say, a strategy meeting. The agenda is really full, lots of issues to be discussed. And then just during a check-in or a conversation, I can notice really low energy or people not really behaving in their usual way. I think in a Gestalt perspective, you wouldn't move on. You wouldn't go to the next agenda item. You would just stay. You would just say, so what's going on with that? So instead of prioritizing the task, you prioritize the process, because by unraveling the process, then the task becomes more efficient and more effective.
And
so
something that gets untasked.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It gets untasked, and then you find out, if you like, the reality, the authenticity of work. That isn't just about what the strategy says, what the plan needs to do, but actually how are people responding to it? Because that's where the creativity, that's where the efficiency comes from. And that has really changed organizations, even departments and teams, fundamentally.
And then I had a question and I respond, but like it just slipped away. So I will just continue with the other things, and then probably will come back to me. But what I'm curious also about is you said needs to be support, and so what are maybe the basic steps that need to happen before you even enter an organization, and that will mean that your job will actually be possible at all? Because it's a very similar process to therapy, and I realized it only when I went to my supervisor, and for some reason it took me two whole hours to get there, and I was like, you really need to want this. to travel 2 hours to your whatever appointment. So I was thinking it's probably quite similar to organizations. There needs to be a sort of deep willingness to do the work, but on the other hand, there needs to be some knowledge as well.
I think if you're saying what does it take from me in terms of a deep willingness, but also what does it take for the organization? What are the conditions?
Yes.
And I think, every situation is different, but yes, absolutely. There needs to be at least a certain level of engagement. And the reality is there's always some polarizations. As I step into an organization or a team or a department, there are the people that really want the external help and the people that are resistant or unwilling to do that. So I guess it's about understanding as much as possible of the context, maybe doing some early interventions, maybe early one-to-one meetings before going into a team meeting, for example, just making sure that everyone's expectation is there, having a sense of perhaps where the stuckness lies in terms of the dynamics. Because, I think it's complex, it's not just a one-to-one, it's really complex. You can have loads of political issues at play, loads of historical issues that might be being enacted or in the moment through the stuckness.
Yeah.
So it is a depend type of answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I remember the questions because you were saying about relationships and managing uncertainty. And I think there is one thing that in these times, which are extremely uncertain, that we project on our leaders, which is we want them to tell us exactly how things are going to be.
Absolutely.
And there is something about leaders being trained to deliver that.
Yes.
And to show that they're impenetrable, invulnerable,
Totally.
and inhuman, basically.
Totally.
And so I'm wondering, is there a space for genuine, authentic leadership where the leader really is able to say, this is a really hard situation and I don't have the answers, but I'm happy to be in the trenches with you. And let's look at this together.
Certainly there is. Because, I think what you're alluding to is one of the myths of leadership. The myth of leadership goes something like, as a leader, I have to always be in control, in the know, in charge. I have to be like a bit like the captain of the ship, and have my everything at my fingertips. And unfortunately, it's a myth that a lot of leadership development programs are built on. The view that I have to change myself, I have to be the best, and then I influence others, and then somehow the situation changes. But this is also not what people respond best to, you know. And I guess there's something around understanding that actually followers want leaders that show some vulnerability, because if you have a invulnerable leader, you're less likely to want to bring to them any of your issues that you might have. It might also be shaming, and also we have to sort of think that socially and culturally time is moving on. It's no longer the old style captain of the ship, you know, maybe, you know, that we used to have. And millennials now are in organizations, and they are much more emotional. They want the organizations to respond more to their needs. And so having this kind of in control, really sort of stern hierarchical leader is not cutting it. And leaders do know that. In fact, I've seen some situations where leaders have struggled, in fact, to keep some authority as well, in the sense that they confuse being authoritative with having some authority, which actually you do need in terms of a leader. And so they struggle to say no, and they tiptoe sometimes around their followers. So you can have all sorts, really.
And maybe I would like to ask you, how do you see group dynamics happening, and also kind of enacting things within a group? And I think there is a lot being said about personal therapy, about projections, and the internet is full of that, but there is much less knowledge and discussion about group dynamics and how we as a group are giving birth to our leaders, from really disowning parts of our own power, from projecting what we don't want in ourselves on people who are leading us, and all these kind of things. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit or give voice a little bit to all those dynamics that people don't necessarily hear about in the media, because it's normally talked about the kind of one-to-one relationships, but not about what a big group can do to a psychology of a person.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is, you know, how can we put more texture around some of the group dynamics that happen, you know, in a meeting. And in fact, you know, I'm going to go back to Gestalt, and Gestalt has a view of how they speak about moderations to contact, you know, how people stop themselves. And you have, and these get enacted in teams very easily. So you could have what we call a very typically confluence, you know, it's a call to confluence. And often in teams, we see leaders actually wanting this confluence. So surrounding themselves by yes people around them. So that's one dynamic that gets, you know, can be very toxic actually within a team, because if you're either a yes person, but if you're kind of standing up for something else, then you get excluded. We have issues of people not feeling that they can express themselves for whatever reason. So there's lots of dynamics that don't get spelled out because they are a bit more complex in teams, but certainly get enacted all the time. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, or if that's what you were looking for.
I guess another thing that maybe I'm trying to understand for myself is also how, by giving away our own power, we are maybe contributing to a leadership, or like to creating a leader that will then take it away.
Yes.
And I mean, I've realized that actually in my group facilitation training, where I really enjoyed our facilitator kind of very gently, but and subtly, but incredibly directly giving us like, do you maybe want to just turn on the air conditioning, or like really not taking on tasks that we could do, so that
Yes.
we realize what are all the tasks that are present in the room,
Yes.
that need to be shared, that,
Right.
that they don't need to do for us. And it's
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
Gestalt Laura Pearl's thing is just give people support, give as much support as necessary, but as little as
Yes. But
possible.
not too much. Not too much.
Exactly.
I think you've pointing out that, you know, in a way, when a group forms and there's a group leader, and the facilitator isn't always a group leader. So unlike your experience of facilitation, sometimes there is a group leader, or there's a head of a department or a CEO. So a facilitator comes in a slightly different role. But there is this dynamic between leaders that take too much control. In fact, what they're inviting is a polarization in the team, and then the team gets disempowered.
Yeah.
So the more I take, the less this. And I've worked with these people, with these leaders, and they say to me, "Oh my God, how can I get my team to do more? Why don't they rise to the occasion?" Without realizing that there is a co-creation here. They are part of the issue. So it's like the more you take control, the less people step up. It's a bit like in a couple,
Yeah.
you know, we kind of polarize in that way. So that dynamic is interesting. But also when I work with a team, I always recognize, especially when I'm facilitating a team, let's say an action learning team or something that starts, there's this sense that you have to put in more energy initially. You know, I think as a leader, you are there and you define some of the norms, and you either impose the norms, you know, which I wouldn't recommend, because then you will get a backlash, or you really make enough space to decide what sort of team do we want to be. But at the beginning of the journey, it's normal for the facilitator to be more leading, as long as they know that that gradually, you know, they will then pass on the ownership to the team. Because ideally, you want a self-functioning team, especially at senior level. There is no way you can have a team that is so dependent on.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, how does shame play into all of this? Because I mean, I do. There was a moment where you were talking about empowering the individual, and I do think a lot of the time the work of one is the work of many.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, it's almost like, as shame is, it's an unspoken thing.
Yes.
It's very difficult to name. When it's named, it's also really difficult to be with.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, how does that all play in the work you do, and how do you work with that?
Yes. Well, first, I want to say that shame isn't always totally avoidable. You know, sometimes it just is. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
why? Because the extent to which people experience and react to shame, you know, changes a lot and varies a lot, depending also mostly on their personal history. So the basic experience, you know, as we know, as therapists, shame is a feeling inappropriate, you know, and it comes from often early developmental factors. So we never know as an organizational person how, you know, how much you're going to step onto that. Having said that, as a Gestalt practitioner, I really view shame usually as a relational and situational phenomena. You know, it happens in relationship, and it really closely connected to how people are interacting. And the only defense, if you like, for shame, or defense or buffer for shame, is relationship. So we need to build a relational bridge often. And that's why I think whenever we do, you know, important work, we start with, you know, how well can we know each other? How can we contract with each other? How can we make sure people feel supported enough? Okay. Otherwise, you know, we step in really quickly into feeling not seen, feeling dismissed, criticized, humiliated, which all are triggers for change. Okay. So having said all of that, you play it a bit by feel, like you would in a therapy session. You know, how shame prone is this team? How shame prone is this organization? What are the interventions that will grade? How can I grade my intervention to a level that is not too shaming? How can I, speak to this and gradually build the relationship with me as the intervener as well as with each other, so that they feel a bit more able and supported. Okay. And I think, we teach shame on our ROG, Relational Organisational Gestalt program, quite a bit, because I think as a practitioner in organization, it's really helpful to be aware of what the shame cues are, how to recognize them. And because they vary greatly, it's a desire to hide, to run away, to become passively aggressive sometimes, or even openly hostile to avoid humiliation. So we need to attend to the relational bridges, either as coaches in one-to-one situations, but also in team members and larger groups of situations. And sometimes shame is also systemic. So how does the shame live in the field?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also having an image of like a cancer in the field. Sometimes that is a very, very, yeah.
Yes.
So you spoke a little bit about the myths of leadership, and so maybe if you could deepen that, one being that the leader has to be this authoritative, know-it-all figure, but is there others that you have encountered? And well, I'll stop here to not make the question more complex, and then I'll come back to the next.
Okay. I think there are a few. I think the one being in control is the big one. I think often leaders think to be a good leader, you have to put your outcome first. So an overvaluing of the outcome over the process and the relationship. That somehow the result matters more than how we got there and what it cost the people to deliver it. And I've seen that often. And of course, people will, in a time of crisis, go overboard and they will deliver. But you can't, and often leaders don't recognize that they can't operate always at that level. And I used to work at the beginning of my consulting career for a small boutique consultancy, management consultancy. And their motto was, where results count and people matter. Because fundamentally, we can't separate both. And we all know that people perform better in situations they feel accepted. So that's another one. And I think the other one actually that comes often, and I really want to say, as we speak of leadership, that we're not talking just about those people at the top of companies. Yeah. You don't need to be at the top to be a good leader.
That's a really important one. Yes.
Isn't it? So whatever your position, you can be leading a meeting, a conversation, even if you're just a junior on the floor that's just come up, okay? You will always have a way of stepping up, of being present, and that is leadership. And a close correlation to that, which often comes, with people's view of, oh, am I a leader, is that sense, or are you born a leader? People say, rather than everyone can lead, their leadership is not a character trait that you have or you're not, or you don't have. And that's so important to realize that they can be developed. It's, and a relational angle, because, in relational change, we have a very clear view of what relational means. And so we say leadership is not a set of attributes, but actually happens in relationship in the moment. So it's like in every moment you can show leadership. So that's a good one. What others?
Sorry, do you?
No, go ahead. I'm just.
What I'm curious about, it's almost. I mean, I've been in kind of corporate science for a long time, and I'm often seeing that the trainings that are being delivered are severely lacking
Yes.
in actual skills that are needed to develop relational and emotional agility.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, what have you seen that is severely missing as knowledge from the field, as information that will maybe, in addition to the interventions that need to be made, really facilitate the work?
Yes. Yes. I think, maybe the way I'll answer this question is I'll tell you what we mean by relational leadership,
Mm-hmm.
and that will be obvious what is missing. Because I think if I start traditionally in the past, it's always about, know better, be better, plan better, control better, all those sorts of attributes that were supposedly applied to leaders. But when we think about what being relational leader, often people talk, or, make sure you've got a good relationship with your followers. It doesn't just mean having a better relationship between leader and follower, or even a better collaboration. That's important, of course, but relational leadership is about recognizing that leaders and people are always interconnected. They're always impact and are impacted by others around them and by the situation and the context. And that dimension of leadership attribute is not recognized enough in traditional ways of training leaders, and this is really important because a lot of leaders or a lot of people think that they need to be consistent, strong, strong men usually, and steady over time, that all their behaviors need to be the same over time. And yet, our abilities and responses, our behaviors, they're all influenced more than we imagine by our context, by the other person. So, for example, if I said to you, can you remember a moment where you really felt at your best? As best. Let's not even talk about high leadership, at your best. And just think, how much was that to do with yourself? How confident you were, what you knew? How much was it to do with who you were with, at the moment? Were they on your side? Were they supportive? Were they agreeing or disagreeing with you? Or what about the situation? Did it feel constrained? Was it a difficult negotiation? Was it a friendly meeting? All of those aspects need to be held in awareness, not controlled, but given due reflection, because all of this contribute to being good leaders.
Interesting. As you said that, I thought of dance I did and the claps of the audience that I danced to. And speaking about co-creation, there was, I've rehearsed that dance over and over again, but nothing really prepares you for the dancing at a rhythm that's given by another. And that really requires, I think Gestalt has the words fluid responsiveness.
Yes.
That really requires to attune to the moment and respond to what's going on in the field, really. Because it's one thing to be in your own field without much constraints or without much, I don't know how to explain, like boundaries. Yeah.
Yes, boundaries. Yeah, exactly.
And then really enter a space where it's almost like creating something in you and one responding to that or not. And I think that for me, I guess, coming from a country where that rigidity is kind of
Yes.
quite strong,
Yes.
it took really a long time to have some solvent
Exactly.
to
Yeah. To
Yeah,
dissolve that
exactly.
and sort of allow for that. Absolutely. I love that you mentioned fluid responsiveness, because of course that's the definition that Sally Danenborn and I gave to the concept of presence, brought in a BGJ article, probably.
Yeah,
Hopefully you would have read that. So, in a being present, being, in a Gestalt sense, which is what we expect of leaders, is about being energetically available and fluidly responsive.
yeah.
So you're there. So in your dancing, you had all the energy, you had prepared, but actually you can never be as perfect as when you're responding to what is happening in the moment.
Exactly. 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 I mean, I'm just noticing my whole body being in that moment and what it really meant to, yeah, yeah. And uh, I'm wondering, um, I really enjoy the relational aspect of it, and I'm wondering, what were maybe some obstacles that you faced in explaining what that matters, or that being adopted as something that actually makes sense? Do you still feel like you need to do a lot of work before people realize, oh, this is the kind of organizational developer we need, rather than another kind?
I think it's a really important question, actually, because I think I certainly don't go into organizations and say I'm a therapist, first of all, because sometimes it can put people off. It's not what they want. Uh, but I think Gestalt supports organizations in a very specific ways. It's not the methodology you need if you just need to go from A to B. So if you've got a project, and I won't call it easy, but it's really where the path is clear. So you've got good planning, management methodology, and the path to going from this place to another is known. So what we call a complicated versus a complex system. I don't know if you know that
No,
difference.
no, but I would love to
So
hear, yeah.
so I'll give you just a brief view. A complicated a jet engine is complicated, but in fact you have a clear method how to build it. But mergers, people, dynamic, resolving by diabetes is complex, because the end point is not clear, and you have to keep going over and over again, and that's where Gestalt is useful. So in some ways, I forgot actually what your main question was. I've just got
What when people choose, what would make people choose you rather than another type of
yes,
organization? And on top of that, what do you need to do to explain why
yes,
this type
yes,
of management consultancy really works, or it
exactly.
has an
Okay.
impact?
Well, uh, in a way, I explain that thing. I say, what have you tried? Usually the situations or the teams that come to me know that they're stuck, that they've probably tried many other issues, and so I'm very clear about how I work from the word go. I say this is how it is, and I know you might feel uncomfortable, or we'll make sure, and I try to work especially with the leader, but so generally they know what to expect. And of course, I grade myself in the moment to sort of make sure that they are supported, if you like. And also the other thing is that what I call ROG, Relational Organisational Gestalt, is a body of knowledge that we've taken Gestalt, the richness of Gestalt theory and the relational approach, and put it in a very simplified frameworks. So in the book I wrote, Relational Organisational Gestalt, there's lots of frameworks and lots of models that simplify, that make that almost a connecting bridge between the theory and also the application in organizations. And I think people respond really well. I talk about the relational approach, and people really connect with it, connect what it means to them, to their team, and to their lives in organization.
And now I'm I don't know why this question right now, but actually, how has being a mother informed you about leadership?
Ah, I think it's a good reminder of your limitations always. I think it's a glib answer, but yeah, it's a good one. I think it's probably honed my knowing of when to lean in and when to lean out, because I don't think you have a choice with children.
Yeah, yeah.
But I want to say primarily leadership is also a willingness to step up. And I think for me, mother, being a parent, rather just being a parent, is about accepting the responsibility and the willingness to step. And that feels really important.
And in addition to that, there is something I had a friend who told me that when she entered a company, she was specifically asked to comment on the company processes because she would have fresh eyes on something that's being done in a certain way for some time. And I feel like that's similar to children. How do you allow space to learn from your children while still, and also how do leaders allow space to learn from their employees while still maintaining that sense of, as you said, sturdiness and stepping up? Because I feel like there is always, and I can see that as a scientist, changing several environments, it's absolutely amazing to see someone new to look at an age-old question and ask the questions that, because you are kind of on this highway of thinking, you just didn't
will miss it,
consider to ask.
yes.
And so I'm just wondering how do you bring that in organizations and kind of create a value out of this, because maybe
out of the difference.
Out of the difference, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's I think Gestalt is really, again, has a lovely answer for us, because it says that contact happens at the boundary between what is me and not me. And I guess this is where we need to sort of stay. And a Gestalt practitioner called John O'Hanafin came up with a concept that he's called the Perceived Weirdness Index. And he says you need to make sure that you have the correct perceived weirdness index in order not to be confluent and merge with the system, as well as not being totally outside. You're there always at that contact boundary. And I think it's, how does this happen? It happens by reflection, by supervision. I'm a great advocate of leaders and practitioners having, whether they call it coaching or supervision or some place to go take away and reflect back about, how's my process sort of impacted this, what's going on here, and what else, not what do I not know, but how am I being that actually is impacting the moment and my organization.
I love that, because it's almost, I can see it in myself so many times, is that the co-creation piece, which I feel I really am grateful to Gestalt to have had introduced. I mean, it may not be in Gestalt, but at least
certainly. It is.
But I'm really grateful for that, and it honestly may have been and I think that's because of the field we are all brought up. It may have been the most difficult to chew on. Because there is that sense of like there is an objective perceiver, and I think especially being in science, that is extremely amplified, that there is such a thing as being completely exempted from the field and being totally objective. And I really like the humbling
we are always part of the field. We are of the field. We can never abstract ourselves. Even when I go in as an observer, and sometimes I do, in a coaching, I'm just here to observe. I know that my presence has an impact on the field. We can never abstract ourselves from that. And that's such a powerful concept and understanding of that.
Yeah,
it's
in
lovely.
in your personal journey, who do you feel were your models, and people that shaped you, in becoming who you are today? And I know it's never one person, and I know it's
so many.
A difficult one, but maybe what are some things that stayed with you that really kind of had profound impact?
I mean, of course, everyone can start in their childhood. So there's lots of, things. I think, both my parents were very shaping individuals. But if I think of my professional development, I think I'm grateful for almost, we never get to where we are without the support at every moment. In the Gestalt field in particular, I was, because what I did is I started in organizations, and I fell in love with someone working in a therapeutic way alongside me when I was really stuck with a team. And I thought, oh, I need to get some of that. So that's how I got into Gestalt. But I met Edwin Nevis. He's passed on now, and he was such a great inspiration of what it is like both to be a practitioner and a leader, because there was such a gentleness in his challenge. Yeah. So you didn't have the in your face, but it was a really lovely model. And one of his most impactful interventions would be, isn't that interesting? And it's really lovely. So I could think of that. Sean Gaffney, my friend and colleague that I co-founded Relational Change with, Sally Denham-Vaughan, has been a huge influence on me. Many Gestaltists that have also led the relational movement. Leanne O'Shea in Australia, Mark Fairfield. I could name so many, actually, Aleksandra, and I'm grateful. I think we all stand on the shoulders of those that come of giants, and those who come before us. So we need to never forget that, and I don't.
That's actually been the first sentence of my thesis.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
What I was also curious about, what were your personal challenges on this journey of stepping up? Was there any time of being shaped by any space being shaped by your gender, or was that not a factor, or was something completely different, historical and cultural? What were those things that you felt were kind of internal resistances that stopped you from really flourishing and becoming more of a leader that you want to be?
Yes, it's yes, it's interesting. Of course, gender. You can't be I think I'm a Gen X. One of the journey. Of course, my gender had a role, and I'm somehow, as we speak, not surprised you are asking that, because in the science industry, in the technical industry, it's very much a factor. My first leadership position was as a project manager in a software development company, because I did engineering as my first degree. And I was young for the position, and also one of very few women in a department of software engineers. And looking back, I think what supported me, interestingly enough, is that I really got on with the people. First, I had a really supportive boss, but actually I knew that all the people that were part of my project team, I needed them because they had more experience, they had more knowledge, and somehow because I had a good relationship with them, we would play squash. I would always lose. Maybe that contributed to it, but it suited them that I stepped up, and they supported me, whilst they were able to focus on the technical aspect. So I think I was lucky in that regard. And it was clear to me, coming from a technical environment, that leadership was always about relationship. You know, it's not about who knows better. I didn't need to know better than them. And often I think there's a competition about, especially in academia, I would say, around who knows better. And that's very toxic, really, because you need a variety of people and complementary knowledge, really, to make a good team. And also, Alex, I think we had fun. That's what makes good leadership. And that's why, I think it's lovely to be able to open spaces, even in relational change now. But certainly gender always has a role. Always has a role.
And I'm also kind of noticing the resonance with being in a technical field and then transitioning into something that's more relational. And I'm just wondering what prompted that change for you. And yeah, what was your journey of yeah.
Say that again. So say that question again.
So what prompted that transition from being in a
technical? Oh, yeah. Oh, that's it's very clear. I was delivering technical solutions, software solutions that were, I won't be too humble, that I thought were really good, technically really good. And somehow putting it in organizations wasn't working as well. So, I got to the limit, I think, where science, at least in the direction, could take me. That actually took me that way. The technical solution was perfect. It was ideal. It was amazing. But then as we engaged people, wanted people to engage with it and live with it, that's where it fell down. And that's why I gradually migrated towards that. And also I was, as I said, a young woman, and I was developing software actually for space missions. So I was surrounded by men, mostly middle-aged, that I spent, a decade or two on the same mission. And I thought that really wasn't for me. I needed a bit more movement. So a bit of both.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because what my current state is that I can see that we have solutions for a lot of the things that we are fighting, and not enough implementation due to barrier, the people barrier. So I really resonate deeply with that.
People barriers, social barriers, cultural barriers. Yeah. And the reasons for that also, climate change, I was going to say, is a big example of that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And just to then wrap up, is there anything you feel like you wanted to say, but I didn't ask for, we somehow missed in the conversation, and you think is really important relating to the topic?
I think we went into nice conversations, a nice direction. Nothing else that I'd like to say. If people are more interested in Gestalt and organizations, they can find us at the relationalchange.org website. But no, I think I really enjoyed our conversation, Alex, and meeting you. And I imagine we could have spent a lot more time talking.
Yes. Yes. Thank you a lot for taking the time, and I also really thank you a lot for the work you're doing, which I think is really important, and as we discussed in the beginning, especially in times like this one. So thank you really much.
Take care. Bye-bye.